Tonight on the Black Channel, we explore the legacy of Dr. King without the media filters, without the white establishment portraying it for us. The Black Channel is live. Unapologetic, unadulterated, and absolutely uncompromising. Greetings, brothers and sisters from around the world, and welcome back to the home, the haven, the stronghold, and the everlasting superfortress of intelligent black thought. We are the Black Media. This is the Black Channel. I am your host, your brother, your humble servant, the voice of Black America, the Black Authority, broadcasting to you live from the only historically black college university of higher education and learning in the cosmos. You are, of course, welcome to join us. And join us you shall, because on tonight's program, I want you to be aware of a few things here. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would have been about 93 years old now. And Dr. King, his birthday actually would have been yesterday, even though they want to shut things down tomorrow. But his birthday actually would have been yesterday. And I think it's very, very important that we not lose track of time, because as history marches on, memories tend to fade. The people who were there and actually witnessed it tend to grow old. They tend to die. Things begin to change. And then individuals with interests, their own personal interests, their own agendas, step in for the purposes of changing things. Not for the good of the people, for the good of themselves. And Dr. King was a very, very early target of this. As black people were making historic strides and making historic progress, Dr. King became the primary target of the establishment and of the government and of the society to attempt to steer black people's discontent, black people's pent-up feelings of resistance, and to direct and focus that energy towards pursuing not reparations, but integration. And in the process of doing that, they created and fabricated a Dr. King who simply did not exist. But that's the first thing that you do when you've killed your enemies. You then go back and reframe them. You either demonize them, or if it's not convenient to demonize them, then you fabricate them into something that they were not. And we have been slowly but surely deconstructing the fabrication and revealing the truth underneath. And slowly but surely, the white supremacist establishment has begun to cede ground and surrender at the idea of fabricating the myth any longer. Because what they did not count on was that our generation would research. Our generation would dig into the subject. Our generation wouldn't just take your word for it. We would actually look into it and find out, did he say anything else other than "I have a dream"? And what we found was that, yes, he did. He had a lot more to say long after that event was over. And this is an opportunity for us to learn about that. I will not retread too much ground here. Professor Black Truth did an absolutely excellent commentary about this. He just released an excellent video going into this in the withering detail that he is famous for at this point. And you've done yourself a tremendous disservice if you talk about Dr. King and did not watch that. But for tonight's program, and Professor Truth quoted Dr. King. He played clips from Dr. King. Very, very excellent commentary. However, in my exploration of Dr. King tonight. I would not like to necessarily talk to Dr. King necessarily. I would like to turn those duties over to someone far more capable and far more able than myself, Dr. John Henry Clarke, who spoke about Dr. King and put it in its proper perspective, both for allies, adversaries, and critics. There was something in particular that he had said that caught my attention. Thought it was very, very important to hear that as well. A few things that he had in mind when he was talking about Dr. King and Gandhi and how to put this in its proper perspective.
The passive resistance of the civil rights movement was sold as a way of life. A strategy is never a way of life. A strategy is something you use the same as you use an orange. When the juice is gone, you throw it in the garbage can. Mahatma Gandhi was an East Indian nationalist, but a very skillful politician. And he always had a violent alternative waiting in the wing just in case his nonviolence didn't work.
Today marks a big...
And I thought that was very, very important because we've been sold on the idea that Dr. King was a metaphor and synonymous for nonviolence, which really just means when black people are oppressed, we are to be non-responsive. Not just nonviolent, but non-responsive. That's the great misnomer and the great lie that we've been sold on.
Committed man to struggle, and he made great sacrifice within that struggle. I had some strong disagreements with him. I never thought that we should be locked into the concept of nonviolence as a way of life. I was perfectly willing to use it as a strategy. I think we should be slow in criticizing Martin Luther King. He was brave enough to put his life on the line for what he believed. We are still here talking. That's proof enough of his bravery over ours.
No matter what you might think, some of Dr. King's beliefs, some of Dr. King's methods, no matter what you might believe or what you might think to yourself, those words spoken by the immortal ancestor, Dr. John Henry Clarke, eclipse everything. No matter what you might think, the fact that Dr. King was willing to lay down his life and was required to do so, and knowing it, did not shrink from it, while the rest of us, for the most part, are still here, can't get most of the people here today to give up $1 or a day of their time. And this man, who was the chief spokesperson, was willing to lay down his entire life. You cannot question his courage. You cannot question it. He was 39 years old. 39 years old. He was not an old man. He might have been an old soul, but he was not an old man. And as he said, he didn't have a martyr complex. He, like anybody, he wanted to live a long life. He said that. I'm like anybody. I want to live a long life. But more than that, I wish to do God's will. That's character. Even if you believe that some of his beliefs, some of his behaviors, some of his methods were misguided, the bottom line is that's character. And I would rather have 100 men willing to die for what they believe than 1 billion people who wouldn't so much as stub their toe. These are things that you are not taught. These are things that you are not told. and you have had the history of Dr. King curated for you. You've had that history curated for you. And they have told you, listen this far and no farther. You don't need to hear anymore. But I'm telling you that there's more to it than that. I'm telling you that there's more to it than that. And I felt that a good place to start with that was to let Dr. John Henry Clarke tell the story of it. There's another clip I want to play for you here, explaining about Dr. King and Gandhi, and if there was a shortcoming, explaining what it was and what the main difference was. And I found it to be quite telling.
We need to look at, because Martin Luther King relates to the radical black minister. And if we look at all of this and look at the fact that Martin Luther King stayed out of hands at a time where violence would have been suicide. And he saw the concept of nonviolence turn obsolete before his eyes.
If you didn't make that out, Dr. Clarke said that Dr. King stayed our hand at a time when violence would have been suicide, and yet he watched and witnessed as the concept of nonviolence turned obsolete before his eyes. And if you want more of the details of that, if you don't know what he's referring to, Professor Black Truth's video does an excellent job of that, where Dr. King talked years later about after his I Have a Dream speech, where he said that the dream had turned into a nightmare because the country had not moved on it. And there was a lot to learn in that regard. A lot to learn.
And he knew this, and beginning to chart another course of action that would have made him an international politician. We have certain mistaken notions about him that we need to clear up. He was an admirer of Mahatma Gandhi. He was not a follower of Mahatma Gandhi.
Dr. Clarke is saying there are some misconceptions about Dr. King that we need to clear up. He was an admirer of Mahatma Gandhi, but he was not a follower of Mahatma Gandhi. And Dr. Clarke goes on to explain more.
He did not know Mahatma Gandhi with any degree of thoroughness, nor did any person around him know Mahatma Gandhi with any degree of thoroughness. Mahatma Gandhi was an East Indian racist. Mahatma Gandhi was a nationalist. King was a universalist.
He said that Dr. King did not know Mahatma Gandhi in any in-depth way, nor did any of his people. Mahatma Gandhi, East Indian racist. He was a nationalist. He was an Indian nationalist. And Dr. King was a universalist. These were distinct differences. Differences in ideology, differences in motive. And that's something to keep in mind.
King believed in all people and the universal brotherhood of all people, which is ideal. Gandhi was practical. Gandhi believed in India, 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 and India. Gandhi didn't even have a good word to say about the Chinese next door being kicked around by the Japanese. Never said one word about it. Gandhi gave his people an economic incentive the king never outlined. When the British were charging too much for salt, he had his famous salt march to the sea. He told his people that salt is as plentiful as sand. He bankrupted the British Salt Company by this single act. And while he said he's nonviolent, He had a violent alternative waiting in the wing. The Sikhs in the northern frontiers of India, who held knives so well you think all of them were born surgeons.
Dr. Clark is saying that while Mahatma Gandhi is marketed to the world as nonviolent, and certainly he did use some of those tactics, Mahatma Gandhi had a violent alternative waiting at his disposal. Primarily the Sikhs in the north, who were ready and willing to make whatever moves they needed to make at his word and on his behalf. And he talks, for example, about when he said for them to lay down on the train tracks. I want you to learn something about Mahatma Gandhi.
And he told the British, if you don't deal with me, you got to deal with them. When he told 50,000 Indians to lay on the train and dare the train to move over you, he knew what he was doing. He had alerted the fireman, even if the engineer was English, that fireman was alerted. If that train goes near those bodies, that fireman would have to buy himself another head. That engineer would have to buy himself another head.
He's saying that when he told 50,000 people to lay down the train tracks, that he had let his people know that if that engineer attempts to run those people over, you are to do him in. That's why he's saying if he attempts to run them over, the engineer is going to need a new head. That is something in particular I want you to be aware of. Understand what they were dealing with here. That was the man, the real man you were talking about. That was the real individual. That was the real Gandhi. And so they can make all the movies that they want to. They can make all the movies that they want to. But they don't tell you about this. They don't tell you about this. They don't speak about any of these things. You see, the people of India understand who Mahatma Gandhi was. Because the white establishment let them know. The white establishment was not able to rewrite Gandhi to the Indian people. You can put Ben Kingsley in all the movies you want to. The white establishment were not able to rewrite this. They were not able to change that. They were not able to turn him into something different so the people understood what it was. And we as black people need to be aware of who this man really was too. Gandhi, but also Dr. King. We cannot allow the people who killed Dr. King to write his legacy. We can't allow the people who killed Dr. King to sit up here and write his legacy for him. That would be wrong. That would be treason on our part. We can't allow that. That is why I'm holding this broadcast tonight, because I want you to be aware we cannot allow that to occur. And that's why right now I want to introduce you to something. For those of you who are unaware, you've heard a lot of things and whatnot. I want to introduce you to the letter from the Birmingham Jail. I will not read the entire thing because it is rather long. But I want you to be aware of exactly what he said when he was arrested down there and he wrote the letter from the Birmingham Jail. I'm going to read some parts of it. It says, "My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities, quote, unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all the criticisms that cross my desk, my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill and that your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. I think I should indicate why I am here in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the view which argues against, quote, outsiders coming in. More basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Let me be very, very clear to the folks listening to me right now. I don't care. Those of you who are new here, those of you who were not here a decade ago, I do not care what it is you believe. I do not care what it is you think. I am just the latest iteration of a long but never-ending train of black people, particularly black men, but black people who have spread the sermon of freedom, whether it be from the pulpit or the plantation. We do not get paid for it. We are threatened for it. Some have died for it. So many will still die for it. And just like me, they told Dr. King, well, why don't you worry about where you're from? That's the first thing they tell you. So freedom should just be isolated to Shreveport, Louisiana, Mobile, Alabama, Chicago, Illinois, Omaha, Nebraska. See, that's what they tell you, is that you should be concerned only about the people where you are. That's an old tactic that they've used. And if you sit up here and understand that white supremacy is global, and if you take the fight to white supremacy globally, then it changes. White supremacy is global. We cannot fight it locally. And don't let anyone shame you into believing that your purpose is to fight it locally. It is not a local issue. It is a united global network, and you must face it the same way. Dr. King goes on here to say, and this paragraph was really key for me. I want you to listen to these two paragraphs. I'm skipping down a little bit, but he says, then it occurred to us that Birmingham's mayoral election was coming up in March, and we speedily decided to postpone action until after Election Day. When we discovered that the Commissioner of Public Safety, Eugene Bull Connor, had piled up enough votes to be in the runoff, we decided again to postpone action until the day after the runoff so the demonstrations could not be used to cloud the issues. Like many others, we waited to see Mr. Connor defeated, and to this end we endured postponement after postponement. Having aided in this community need, we felt that our direct action program could be delayed no longer. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You're quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. Just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind of the individuals so that individuals could rise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, so must we see the need for non-violent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. The purpose of our direct action program is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door for negotiation. I therefore concur with you in your call for negotiation. Too long has our beloved Southland been bogged down in a tragic effort to live in a monologue rather than a dialogue. Those are the words of Dr. King. Yes, non-violent. However, I don't necessarily believe in what you call violence. I believe in pressure. When he talks about tension, he's saying, I believe in putting pressure on you. I believe in making you uncomfortable. Bringing comfort to the afflicted and affliction to the comfortable. Let me explain something to you right now. You know what? Let me let that wait. Let me let that wait a moment here. But there's a point I want to make here about Dr. King when you try to compare him to everybody else. I want you to understand something, and I'm going to get to that here in just a moment, but there's a point I want to make in comparing him to everyone else. I want to read a little further here. It says, one of the basic points in your statement is that the action that I and my associates have taken in Birmingham is untimely. Some have asked, why didn't you give the new city administration time to act? The only answer that I can give to this query is that the new Birmingham administration must be prodded about as much as the outgoing one before it will act. So in other words, for the folks who sit up here and try to tell you that we need to give Joe Biden time, even Dr. King would not have done that. What he's saying is you have to put the pressure on, and the pressure has to be on before the folks you're trying to support get into office, and the pressure must be on them as they enter office so that they understand that you have not gone away, and you're not just going to walk off and trust them to their word. You are going to put the pressure on and keep the pressure on. This is Dr. King talking. This is Dr. King talking, not sounding like the black clergy of today sitting up here telling black folk, well, just vote for me. Give Biden time now. Give Biden time. He gonna change now. You need to let the man work. He just got in office now. Can't you just wait on him? He just got in office. Dr. King wouldn't have done that. This is a Dr. King that you all had not heard of before. This is the Dr. King you hadn't heard of before. The letter from the Birmingham Jail letting you know, oh, no, the time of waiting, no, we done with that. That's when we get to the next paragraph we'll get here to in just a moment. I want to ease my way into that one. He goes on to say, we are sadly mistaken if we feel that the election of Albert Boutwell as mayor will bring the millennium to Birmingham. While Mr. Boutwell is a much more gentle person than Mr. Connor, they are both segregationists, dedicated to maintenance of the status quo. I have hope that Mr. Boutwell will be reasonable enough to see the futility of massive resistance to desegregation, but he will not see this without pressure from devotees of civil rights. So in other words, he wasn't sitting here like some folks talking about with Joe Biden and just trusting him to do the right thing. He was under no illusions about what he was dealing with. And by the way, you notice he flat out called them segregationists. He said, by the way, the guy who just won, he's a kinder, gentler segregationist. Dr. King didn't mince words. So most folks say, well, you is insulting our new friends. Give him time. We got to make allies. We got to make allies. Dr. King walked in here, stomping all over that idea. This is the Dr. King that your parents haven't told you about, and ignorant folk on the internet who don't know anything. They didn't say anything like this. Yeah, Dr. King was unapologetic about it. Yeah, you're the new guy. You might have beat Bull Connor, but I know you're a segregationist too, and you're dedicated to the status quo. Dr. King goes on to say, my friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure. Lamentably, it is an historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the more moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture. But as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups tend to be more immoral than individuals. And then comes the next paragraph. The next paragraph is probably the one that, from this speech, a lot of folk quote the most. He says, we know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was, quote, well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. And at that time, this letter had to actually be smuggled out of the jail. It had to be smuggled out of the jail because they understood what he was saying. He was saying, we're not waiting. He was saying that I'm not going to get out here and tell black folk to wait some more. So whether I'm in this jail or out of it, I'm not telling us to wait anymore. I'm not telling you wait for pie in the sky and heaven in the hereafter. I'm saying right here, right now. Understand this. They understood what the hell he was saying. He's not saying, we understand the strategy of benign neglect and stalling tactics. He's saying I am not going to endorse any more stalling tactics. This was absolutely abhorrent to them because they understood what he was saying. That's why the letter had to be smuggled out. When he said that, they're like, oh, he's not waiting. I know it might sound subtle and you all might be saying, well, this doesn't sound very provocative. This was extremely provocative when he said that. That I am not going to tell the black masses that they need to wait any longer. And anyone telling that they need to wait, I will not endorse that. We're done waiting. But then he goes on even further. John Lewis didn't want to get into this kind of good twala. Dr. King said, I'm skipping down a little bit here. Dr. King said, I have tried to stand between these two forces, saying that we need to emulate neither the do-nothingism of the complacent nor the hatred and despair of the black nationalist, for there is the more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I am grateful to God that through the influence of the Negro Church, the way of nonviolence became an integral part of our struggle. If this philosophy had not emerged, by now many streets in the South would, I am convinced, be flowing with blood, and I am further convinced that if our white brothers dismiss as rabble-rousers and outside agitators those of us who employ nonviolent direct action, and if they refuse to support our nonviolent efforts, millions of Negroes will, out of frustration and despair, seek solace and security in black nationalist ideologies, a development that would inevitably lead to a frightening racial nightmare. Now, I want you to understand the necessity of rhetoric. When Dr. King is talking about the frightening nature of the black nationalist, that is right up there with what you just heard Dr. John Henry Clarke saying about Mahatma Gandhi and the Sikhs. And remember, Mahatma Gandhi told the British that if you don't deal with me, you will be dealing with the Sikhs. Stomp down hardheads. About that life. Ready to die for the cause. So I suggest you talk to me, because when they show up, they won't be talking. So understand, when it sounds like he's putting this really frightening thing on that, is because that is the language that white supremacists understand. I want you all to be very, very clear about that. That is the language that white supremacists understand. They understand the language of power. They understand that. So Dr. King was choosing those words for a purpose and for a reason, because he knew that his words were going to be directly sent back to them. So just be very clear about why it is you hear him ginning up the black nationalists. Oh, these are the hard heads. These are the dudes who are going to tear things up. And eventually they did, by the way. And eventually that's exactly what they did. Or should I say that's exactly what we did, by the way, when it came down to it. Dr. King goes on to say, oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself, and that is what has happened to the American Negro. Something within has reminded him of his birthright of freedom, and something without has reminded him that it can be gained. Consciously or unconsciously, he has been caught up by the zeitgeist. And with his black brothers of Africa and his brown and yellow brothers of Asia, South America, and the Caribbean, and Dr. King talked about this Dr. Clarke talked about this as well, by the way. If I can find that clip, I want to play that for you. But Dr. Clarke talked about that as well. The United States Negro is moving with a sense of great urgency toward the promised land of racial justice. If one recognizes this vital urge that has engulfed the Negro community, one should readily understand why public demonstrations are taking place. The Negro has many pent-up resentments and latent frustrations, and he must release them. So let him march. Let him make prayer pilgrimages to the city hall. Let him go on freedom rides and try to understand why he must do so. If his repressed emotions are not released in non-violent ways, they will seek expression through violence. This is not a threat, but a fact of history. Now, those are the words of Dr. King, and I want you all to keep something in mind. I want you to keep something in mind as you're hearing those words, and you might be tempted to be very cynical about it, and I won't necessarily blame you for that as well. You might be tempted to be very cynical about that, but I want to put this in its proper context for you. Let us say, for example, that you were sitting across a table from, for example, Richard Spencer. And let's just say that Richard Spencer was speaking on behalf of white nationalists. And I'm going to change the language of Dr. King. And Richard Spencer is telling you, you know what? Negroes are gaining too much. They're taking too much from us. The Negroes are getting too much. Black people are going too far. They're getting too much. And I want you to tell me, if you thought the words you just heard Dr. King say were benign, all I'm going to do is change it. I'm only going to change one part of it. And tell me, if you were sitting at a table and Richard Spencer were talking to you and saying what you're about to say, what you're about to hear next, tell me if you would feel it was benign. If Richard Spencer said to you, black people are getting too much, and if one recognizes this vital urge that has engulfed the white community, one should readily understand why public demonstrations like Charlottesville are taking place. The white man has many pent-up resentments and latent frustrations, and he must release them. So let him march. Let him make his prayer pilgrimages to City Hall, to Charlottesville, to Robert E. Lee's monument, to the White House. Let him go on freedom rides and unite the right. And you must try to understand why he must do so. If the white man's repressed emotions are not released in nonviolent ways, they will seek expression through violence. This is not a threat, but a fact of history. Now, if Richard Spencer were sitting across the table from you and said exactly what you just heard, would you still consider those words to be benign? Same context, all I did was just change the racial part of it. Would you still consider those words to be benign? Well, he ain't saying very much. Sounds like a good old-fashioned banal sermon to me. If you heard Richard Spencer tell you that if white people's needs are not met non-violently, well, naturally, violence would be the next step here. And I'm not threatening you. That's not a threat. That's just a fact of history. Still consider that to be innocuous? Still think it is? You tell me. Because I want you to understand, when they finally read Dr. King saying that, they felt the same way. They felt the exact same way when they saw that and heard that. I want you to have an opportunity, weigh that for yourself, and you tell me if it's innocuous in that context, if it is just completely harmless and diluted in that context. Dr. King goes on to say, I had hoped that the white moderate would see this need. Perhaps I was too optimistic. Perhaps I expected too much. I suppose I should have realized that few members of the oppressor race can understand the deep groans and passionate yearnings of the oppressed race, and still fewer have the vision to see that injustice must be rooted out by strong, persistent, and determined action. I am thankful, however, that some of our white brothers in the South have grasped the meaning of this social revolution and committed themselves to it. And he goes on to name some names. But despite these notable exceptions, I must honestly reiterate that I have been disappointed with the church. I do not say this as one of those negative critics who can always find something wrong with the church. I say this as a minister of the gospel who loves the church, who was nurtured in its bosom, who has been sustained by its spiritual blessings, and who will remain true to it as long as the cord of life shall lengthen. Did you all hear them tell you about Dr. King saying that, by the way? Did you hear the media talk about that? They have no problem reminding you about one or two sentences from I Have a Dream. Did you hear this? How many times have they sat up here and really promoted the letter from Birmingham Jail to you so that you would read what he had to say here? He goes on to say, the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. If today's church does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authenticity, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning for the 20th century. Every day I meet young people whose disappointment with the church has grown and turned into outright disgust. Brothers and sisters from around the world, Dr. King was attempting to warn the church to prevent exactly what has occurred. He was warning them that if they didn't change, this, what we're in today, would occur. My generation has completely dismissed the church. The church is no longer a factor and is no longer influential. Dr. King warned them that this would occur. I am here to report to them the die is cast. It's all over. He was correct. Judgment Day has already come. The church is already irrelevant. He attempted to warn you half a century ago. The verdict is in. There's a reason that I chose the letter from Birmingham Jail. The verdict is in. My generation will tell you the church is a non-factor. We are still fighting white supremacy, but no one looks to the church. We all see it as some irrelevant social club where little old ladies and failed old men get together to compare their prescription medications, show off their shiny new walkers, kiss white ass, and get nothing done. And that is what the church is today. And Dr. King attempted to warn them half a century ago that if you don't listen, he's like, I'm in these streets. I'm talking to the young people. The young folk is saying, hey, you're all right, but we don't fool with that church over there, man. We don't fool with them. We don't fool with them. Well, the prophecy has come to pass. The church is irrelevant now. Completely irrelevant. There's one last sentence I want to read for you here. Dr. King says, never before have I written so long a letter. I'm afraid it is much too long to take your precious time. I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been writing from a comfortable desk. But what else can a man do when he is alone in a narrow jail cell other than write long letters, think long thoughts, and pray long prayers? If I have said anything in this letter that overstates the truth and indicates an unreasonable impatience, I beg you to forgive me. If I have said anything that understates the truth and indicates my having a patience that allows me to settle for anything less than brotherhood, I beg God to forgive me. You notice, I want you all to know that people who recognize writing, you notice a tonal shift as this letter goes on. You recognize a tonal shift. You notice that the tone starts to get sharper as the letter goes on until eventually he's talking about the oppressor race. It goes from being really diplomatic to eventually it gets very sharp in tone, very direct. Very uncompromising. And in that vein, because I was telling you here, for those of you who might be saying, well, he's talking about Asians and brothers and sisters and whatnot, Dr. John Henrik Clarke had some words about that. And I thought that you would find those to be rather helpful and profound as well.
That's proof enough of his bravery over ours. I think the March on Washington was just that. It wasn't a march on Washington, it was a march in Washington. I don't know of any sweeping achievements that came out of it. It was a great ceremony. I'd be hard-pressed to identify the substance. I happen to think we've gotten enough mileage out of marching. It was a great ceremony. It was a great rehearsal for a show we did not put on the road. For a time, we had the attention of the world. Between the Civil Rights Movement, the Caribbean Federation Movement, and the African Independence Movement, We had the attention of the world, and there were people, though they hated our guts, they were willing to make concessions to us based on the fact that we were ready to handle power. We made too many speeches and didn't do the necessary work, the unglamorous off-camera work that would have made it possible. That was our great mistake. Ceremony that lacks substance.
What Dr. Clark was saying was, at the time, we had the attention of the world. We had the attention of different places in the world. And as I have taught you all, power does not respect weakness. Power respects power. And from Indochina, they don't want you using that term anymore, but Southern Asia, the African continent, what would become the African Union. Everybody was looking at Black America over here and saying, hey, they're moving and making things occur and whatnot. And those are places that were looking to us to say, hey, those are the power brokers over there right now. They got the bad guys rocked on their heels. People are saying, hey, if you got power, we're trying to join up with you. And that was what he was saying, that even people who didn't like us and didn't respect us, non-Black people who didn't like us and didn't respect us, non-Black people who did not like us, they respected us because they saw that we were getting into a position where we were actually able to handle power at this point. We were actually moving into positions of power and not asking for it, but taking it. That's when you start getting people's respect. That's when they start seeing you as a peer. That's when their attitude toward you changes. So when you talk about these non-Black people, just understand at the time there, Black folk were making things happen and people saw us with a different eye. They saw us with a different perspective. If you want to know why it is, remember years later in Tiananmen Square, you had Chinese people carrying pictures of Dr. King. With all the talk about Dr. King and Gandhi, when Tiananmen Square happened, the Asians were carrying pictures of Dr. King. Go do your research at Tiananmen Square. They were carrying pictures of Dr. King, not Gandhi. They understood the power of doing that. They understood what it was. Their perspective on us had changed. And that is what I want you to understand. So when you hear those words, I want you to have them in their proper context. That when we're talking about, Dr. King's talking about these other groups seeing us as peers, that we were no longer seen as just victims and whatnot, that we had finally gotten to a point where these people, we had the opportunity for them to acknowledge us as their peers. That was important. But I want to give you one more thing here, but you know what? I think I'm going to just hold that for a moment. I think I'm going to just hold that. Because there's one more part here that I want to go over and talk about. There's one more thing I would like to share with you, but I don't think I want to get to it right this moment. I think I want to just hold that until after we take a very brief commercial, non-commercial break. I think I want us to go ahead and do that instead. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here now. And when we come back, I want to put some of this in its proper perspective because there's one more thing that needs to be dealt with, but I want to make sure it's in its proper perspective. Before I do, I want to thank everyone who has contributed to support tonight's program here. So to Richard, thank you very much. Leslie and Keith, thank you very much for your support here. And my man Andrew, and to everyone else who has contributed to support tonight's program on PayPal or CashApp, thank you very much for your support. When we come back, we are going to deal with one last thing here about Dr. King to put it in its proper perspective for you. This is The Black Channel.
Join 6zeros.net, a forum built to discuss all things relevant to Black people. On our forum, a check doesn't mean you're famous. It means your blackness has been verified by our staff.
Sorry, Chad.
We also have premium merchandise with same-day shipping on most orders. And when you're ready for some dope content, check out the 0 Hour blog.
Don't just sign up, post.
I'm having a really good time with you tonight.
I'm having a good time with you too.
Want to go somewhere private? Just for us?
I like that.
Great. Meet me at 6zeros.net. Black owned, black operated.
The white supremacists use division as a weapon, dividing our families, our wealth, rewarding traitors, murdering heroes. Yet we survived. We fought for our reparations. Now it's our turn to divide and administer God's power. I am Agent Nuria Sellers, a foundational Black American. I promise that nothing will come between us. Buy the sci-fi novel, Nothing Will Come Between Us. Available January 22nd. Pre-order online today at Amazon and Google Play. Spirit of1811publishing.com. Our story, our family.
Hi, this is Brenda Starr, creator of Poetry with a Purpose and author of the book Pressed But Not Crushed. Pressed But Not Crushed is an anthology of political poems that address current and historical issues in American descendants of slave population and African American population. The book describes slaveries and its residuals, Jim Crow segregation, social depredation, and other relevant issues to American descendants of slaves and African Americans, including the current political climate that does not address our issues.
The future of legal betting is finally here. Place a bet using CashApp with Bitcoin right over the phone. Unlike with traditional gambling sites, every bet you place with us, you're guaranteed a 50% probability of winning. All of our bets are one-on-one against a real person and never the house. We offer some of the most unique bets in the industry. Bets like, will LeBron James win his 5th NBA title? Will Joe Biden be elected for a second term? Will Tesla be worth $1 trillion by the end of 2022? You can even bet on if it will rain tomorrow. You can literally bet on any future event. Text the phrase I bet to the number on the screen, and I'll reply with a list of all our available bets.
Are you tired of being overcharged and forced into paying a monthly subscription for your Mac and Windows software? Well, if you are, currently we're having a 50% off discount on all the latest Mac and Windows software, such as AutoCAD, SolidWorks, Photoshop, Microsoft Office, and much more. Our 50% off discount will be ending soon, so be sure to text us Need Software to 323-407-8214. That's 323-407-8214. We aim to please, so expect 24/7 technical support, the latest premium software, instant software links delivered to your email, and PayPal's buyer's protection guarantee.
This is the Black Channel. I am your host, your brother, your humble servant, the Black Authority. Very glad to be with you all here this evening as we are having a discussion and talking about Dr. King and speaking about this in very simple to understand language, making sure that you understand that a lot of the context that you were not given before, it's time for you to have that now. And I would be remiss if I did not cover one more thing here. Because, of course, this will be something that comes up a lot or something that may come up from people. And I want to deal with that. I want to address that because I want to speak to the young folk of today. I want to speak to the fellas and sisters of today. Because despite everything else I've said here, you may have some questions about some things. You might have some questions about tactics. You might even have questions about motives here. And I think that's fair. I don't think it's unfair. I think it is fair, especially if we are going to be asking you to put yourself out there, especially if we are going to be asking you to endanger yourself, to risk life and limb. If we're going to be asking you to do that and pointing you to individuals to serve as your examples, then certainly you should have a full context and understanding what it is, and these things should not be ducked or dodged. That shouldn't be happening. So I want to take this as an opportunity to address that for you as well. I want to take this as an opportunity for you to see what that means. When you hear about Dr. King, and I will not mince words about at the end of the day, like I say, primarily you keep hearing the word nonviolent, and certainly Dr. King was nothing like a Malcolm X or a even Stokely Carmichael or the brothers who came out of the Panther Party and whatnot. And I want you to understand, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that either. Because I want you to understand, everybody ain't a gangster. Everybody ain't gangster like that. Everybody's not a G. Malcolm came up with the gangs. Eldridge Cleaver, Huey Newton, we can go down the list, Fred Hampton, Geronimo Pratt. They came from the streets. They came from the streets. They came from hard scrabble. They came from the worst. They came from the gutter. King didn't have that. King didn't have that. It is what it is, but he didn't have the same upbringing. He didn't come up through the same ropes that these other fellas did. He didn't have that. He was using what he had. He was using what he had. And he was using what he had to the best of his ability. But let's be very, very clear. King couldn't go out there and do the gangster routine. That wasn't him. See, Malcolm could do that. Malcolm could sit there and talk to Harvard, yeah. But if Malcolm needed to get down with you, he would let you know, oh, I'm about that business. I'm about that business. Well, King wasn't like that. Could you imagine Dr. King trying to do the gangster thing? It doesn't work. Recognize what their limitations are. He was filling the role that he could fill. He's the clergy. I mean, like I say, the letter from Birmingham Jail, that's about as far as he could go with it. He would have to learn on the job. So when it comes to the fellas out, King wasn't really talking about putting in that type of work because he wasn't the kind of guy who did that type of work. That doesn't mean that he's invalid. That doesn't mean that he can't be useful. He's got his position to play. He got his role to play. And we have ours. That's the way it is supposed to be. When the brothers and the sisters took to the streets after the murder of George Floyd, the ones who were out there on the streets could do so with confidence because those of us here had their backs and vice versa. So if they needed to get bailed out, if they needed to get paid for and whatnot, we had their backs. We all got our positions to play. There are other folk out there, like for me, for example, I'm too hard for him. It's a quote, he's so extreme and whatnot. Yeah, because I put the spotlight on him. I damn sure do. Keisha Bottoms didn't do the bidding of the people when she was instructed to do so. I put the spotlight on her. I made some folks uncomfortable. Some of her rapper friends in the city got uncomfortable because of the spotlight that I put on her. But understand that it's a necessary role. So y'all are doing your back rooming and whatnot. No, we're negotiating behind the scenes. Okay, Keisha, I suggest you negotiate quickly. Because if you don't, Jason Black and the new black media and B1 is not waiting. We're not one of your friends at the cocktail club. The folks who are trying to pull your coat and tell you, hey, the message needs to change because there's fellas out here talking to the street and they ain't sitting up here playing around about it. Understand, when folks were out there in the streets in Atlanta, I was bailing people out of jail. I was sending bail money. I wasn't saying to make nothing easier. And Keisha, well, you know, I'm a black mayor in Atlanta, baby. If you ain't doing the bidding of the people, you might as well be a white supremacist sitting there. I am putting the same pressure on you that I would put on the rest of them. It will not change. I'm putting the exact same pressure on you that I'm putting on all of the others. You are going to have to earn what you get. And if you are not doing anything, then this is what it's going to be. But I will not compromise. So whoever it is who got to you first and was trying to tell you, you know, you've been slow rolling, making these changes, you need to pick up the pace. Because if you don't listen to us, there's dudes out here who ain't waiting on anything and they're not living by the code we're having with you where we don't say nothing against you publicly. No, there's some black folk out here with a big enough megaphone to speak against you publicly. And they will do it. You talking about us being on code with you, Keisha. There's folks out here who got their own code going, and you're going to find yourself under the wheels of that train. You need to move a little faster. She didn't move a little faster. It is what it is. Folks were trying to tell her things need to change. It is what it is. But everybody ain't built like that, and I understand that. The only thing I ask is you don't get in our way. Don't get in our way. That is the only thing that I ask. Do not get in our way. Do what you do, how you do it, and as long as you are doing it in the interest of the people, that's fine. Don't cross us. Don't do that. Bad move. Bad move. Bad move. You're taking a look at the drunk Uncle Lori Lightfoot. Lori Thunderbird Lightfoot up there in Chicago. She didn't listen. Pretty soon she won't have to listen. She gonna have plenty of time to sit here and browse the liquor, brown liquor, black liquor, whichever is her taste. She'll have plenty of time to browse it all here in a minute. She was yelling and screaming and whatnot, and she didn't like it. I'm a black mayor, and they coming at me. Oh, yeah, we coming at you. We sure are. You damn right. We made it fashionable to take her to task. We damn sure did. You know why? Because the folks who were pulling her coat before, she wasn't listening. They told her, don't worry, your LGBT credentials, while you're dressed like Tom Bosley from Happy Days, is gonna save you. Didn't work. Old Letitia James up there in New York City, boy, I'm telling you, she thought she was gonna run for governor. Grand opening, couple weeks later, grand closing. Damn, that was fast. You know why? Because the folks behind the scenes who were letting her know you off code as hell, she's like, I can bypass that. We showed up, next thing you know, that was over. Yeah, they ran their thing. Lamar Advertising was letting me know, by the way, we got a feeling you might want a billboard in New York. Here's some pricing. We just got a hunch you getting ready to buy some billboards in New York, so we just thought we would send you a sampling of our pricing in the area. We just had Mr. Black, we just got a hunch you getting ready to buy some billboards. Letitia James says she running for governor. We just got a hunch you was getting ready to call. So here's a spreadsheet. Let us know if you need something. But I understand everybody ain't built like that. Look, everybody's not built for the same level of confrontation. Let's be very, very clear. When Dr. King was talking about, well, things could get violent, while I'm certain that he wouldn't just ball up in the fetal position, I'm also certain he wouldn't gully about it like Malcolm and Stokely and Huey. I mean, and just accept it for what it is. If y'all ever saw that movie Glory, remember Andre Braugher? Denzel Washington was the one ready to fight everybody. Andre Braugher is sitting up there, he trying, but he ain't on the level of Denzel. Denzel's like, look here, just point me in a direction and let me start stabbing fools. Andre doing the best he can. It is what it is. He's doing what he can do. So what I'm saying is, you can't sit up here and compare Martin to Malcolm and say, okay, Malcolm is about it like that. Martin should just have it in him. Man, Malcolm came up the hard damn way. Malcolm came up like Frank Lucas, watching family members get killed at an early age. As a child, Dr. King didn't have to deal with that. Yeah, he was living in a system of white supremacy, but white supremacy didn't kick in the front door, start yanking people out, and start killing people like that. He didn't have to learn, I got to survive for myself at an early age. Dr. King didn't have that. So he was dealing with it the way he was taught to deal with that. Malcolm was taught, man, if you don't raise your damn fists, you're going to die. It is what it is. It is what it is. Everybody ain't like Malcolm. And even to this day, a lot of y'all ain't like that and whatnot. And I know what it is whenever I have a function, whenever I have an event. Some of y'all is gangster as hell showing up at my events. And I understand. Y'all are sitting up there like out there in New York, for example, at the SVA Theater. Y'all know that's not no black part of town over there like that. Brothers and sisters' heads are on swivel. Their heads are on swivel out there. And I don't blame you for that. Yes, I do have security at the events, but y'all know what's going on. So I understand when y'all show up, yes, some of y'all got your suits on. People are looking nice and respectable. But if anything want to jump off at any time, y'all ready. This can go from suited and booted to boot up your ass real quick. It really, really can. It really, really can. Right there in the middle of Manhattan. Yeah, it really can go down right here. It really can. Do not underestimate my people out there. It really can go down right now. So I understand that. Everybody ain't built that way, but some of you are. A lot of you are. In Atlanta, in Oakland, in DC. DC really be doing it. But y'all built for that. When they show up, it can be on right this minute. Everybody's not built the same way. So, and that's not to say they're cowards. I'm just saying, just understand some folks, they are just not built to sit up here and be ultra confrontational. They're not built. They're not trained to do that. They haven't really had to be confrontational in that way. You got folk like Dr. King. You run up on him. He gonna try to talk to you. He's gonna try to reason with you. Even if you're an unreasonable person, that's the tool set he was given. He was given a tool set of, well, if something happens, first and foremost, resort to reason. Violence is always a last resort. It's never the first resort. Okay, then you got folks like me, which is, I use the appropriate tool for the job upon the situation. I take my situations on a case-by-case basis. I might talk to you verbally. Then again, I might talk to you some other way. But I will speak to you in the language in which I think you're going to attempt to speak to me. Let me tell you something. I'm from Louisiana. Lil Wayne told you, I don't shoot back, I shoot first. Oh, trust me, if I think there's a problem, believe me, I'm not going to wait to figure out what you got in mind. If it don't even look right, I'm like, okay, I'm going to take care of this first, then figure out what you was trying to do. Oh, man, sure do hate that happened to you there. Got too close doing too much. Everybody's not like that, man. I mean, just bottom line, I want y'all to understand that everybody's not like that, man. Everybody, even if their heart is in it, even if their heart is completely in it, I'm just saying, you need to understand, this dude ain't really built like you are. He's not cut like you are. It's got nothing to do with a lack of character or a lack of courage. Just understand, that's the tool set he got. That's who he is. And it doesn't make him any less of a man or any less of whatever. You just got to understand. And gangsters will tell y'all that. Let me tell you right now, there's only very, very few people listening to me right now. You are stomped down gangsters about that. Bloods, Crips, gangster disciples. There's too many sets around this country, but you all the way about that life. And it's like every situation you go into, you ain't trying to talk to nobody. Or just off top, you are not about speaking to anyone. If the situation ain't right, if somebody come at you wrong, you going towards the knot first. You swinging knuckles first. You ain't even trying to speak. But you understand, everybody's not like that. Everybody can't do it. Everybody can't back it up. So you can't expect people to have a confrontational mindset if they know they can't really back it up if it comes down to it. Furthermore, it would be foolish for them to do so. It would be foolish. You don't grab somebody who doesn't really have the tools or the ability to do it and then go send them out there and say, well, I expect you to act like this other fellow who's got the tools and the ability and been raised to do that. Malcolm was raised gangster. He came up gully. He came up from the gutter. He was running with tried and true, hard down gangsters. He went to prison. Malcolm did a 10-year bid. You damn right. I'm understand something. You don't see that on that screen right there. But Malcolm did it. Malcolm was in prison, y'all. Malcolm pulled years. He pulled years. It don't get more gangster than that. It don't get more gangster than that. Eldridge Cleaver, I can go down the damn list. Geronimo Pratt. It don't get more gangster than that. It doesn't get more gangster than that. Period. This is the reality of it. This is the reality. So I don't judge Dr. King by the template and the measurement of Malcolm X. They came up two different ways, man. What does Dr. King? Dr. King spent a night or two in jail. Malcolm X spent years in prison. Years. I can't compare their experiences. Dr. King spent a couple days in the county jail. Malcolm X spent it in the pen, in solitary confinement. Huey Newton, they put him in solitary confinement. They called the particular cell he was in the Soul Breaker. For those of you who read the book about Huey, they called his the Soul Breaker. Just understand we dealing with different type of people, so I'm not sitting up here looking at Dr. King. He wasn't gangster enough. We had a whole bunch of different people. Mary McLeod Bethune wasn't no gangster like that. I don't have less respect for her. Ida B. Wells wasn't gangster like that. I don't have less respect for her. Madam C.J. Walker was scrappy. She wasn't gangster like that. Harriet Tubman, G. Harriet Tubman, OG. But it was very few Harriet Tubmans. Let's just keep it all the way real. Harriet Tubman was the exception. She was not the rule. Harriet Tubman was the exception. She was not the rule. Let's not sit up here and create some fiction that every female out there was built like Harriet. Harriet was a special breed. She was a special breed. It is what it is. I don't have less respect for Coretta Scott King or Betty Shabazz simply because they wasn't cut like Harriet Tubman. I wouldn't expect them to do that. While I would hope that if it came down to it, they could do a little something, but I ain't expecting them to jump out there and be Amanda Nunes. I'm not expecting that. So being realistic, some folks have a fantasy island view of the world. I don't have that. I know Dr. King for what he was. He did an outstanding job for what he was and what he had. He did an outstanding job with the skill set that he was given at a young age. And remember, they didn't have a template. Remember, by this time, we have television, we have movies, we have radio. So it wasn't like the days of Frederick Douglass where mass communication was simply done by writing and people had to intuit it. With Dr. King, you could see him, you could hear his voice, you could hear his intonation. So if he grabbed the microphone and growled into it and started talking a certain way, that could be seen as threatening. Remember that by this time, the media was all over the situation by this time. And this is what, around the time of Kennedy and Nixon debating. The media was all over it and able to take your words and take sound bites and take clips and characterize it all kinds of ways. They had to become very savvy about image. They had to become very savvy. This was before you had image consultants and people who knew what to do and coaching you for television and stuff. These fellas had to learn all this on the fly and did a hell of a job. Understanding that anything they said could be used and twisted or tainted and characterized to devastate them. They didn't have a bunch of folks to sit up here and coach them in that. In their 30s, people, these were not media personalities who worked for television corporations and had a bunch of training and a bunch of mentors to show them the ropes. These were black fellas in their 30s when television was new. Radio wasn't all that old. And they were still using this communication medium to excellent effect. I recognize that. That wasn't easy. And no matter what you think of Dr. King's beliefs, he was willing to die for them, and ultimately he did, and he never flinched. He never flinched. I consider that to be outstanding. So understand who this man really was. Understand what this man was really about. Not the caricature handed to you by the media, not the caricature handed to you by some internet armchair quarterbacks who've never run a single down, much less won a game. You do not have to agree with everything that Dr. King did or the way in which he did it. What we must agree on is that the system of white supremacy must go extinct, and that we cannot wait and we will not be delayed. Now, that is the only thing that we must agree on. We must agree on that. As far as our methodology for doing so, there's room for reasonable debate about that. As long as we agree the system must be destroyed and we cannot wait to do so. We agree on that, then we can discuss, okay, how we go about it. And even then, there shouldn't be too much discussion about that. At some point, you need to get to moving. Even if you haven't found an ideal solution, you should have a workable solution. Idealism has its place. But you should never let the perfect become the enemy of the good. That can be a concept a lot of people have trouble with, but you should never allow that to be the case. As we are commemorating this day now, Dr. King would be about 93 years old if he were still alive. And he is still alive. Just as the filmmaker Spike Lee went to great pains to show in the movie Malcolm X that we are Malcolm. We are Dr. King also. Revolutionaries do not die. The resistance doesn't die. It moves from one place to another. And understand something, you did not kill a revolutionary, you gave birth to a martyr. The name has rung louder, farther, and higher than anything else. And now that we are putting his image in its proper context, it will gain even more power into the next generation. You will not be able to stamp it down and quiet it out now. It will gain even more power now. When I created the phrase to cut the check, when everybody was talking about reparations, and I popularized the phrase cut the check. And then after that, people dug up Dr. King talking about we're going to Washington to get our check. I am just the latest in a long line of advocates for black people. I am just the latest in a long line. There were many before me. There will be those after me. I'm just the latest occupant before the next one comes. And we are all saying the same thing. We are all saying the same message. We are all repeating the same thing. It is echoing from generation to generation. The echo is getting louder. That is all it's doing. But I would not be able to do what I do today if we had not had ultra courageous young men like Dr. King who were there before me. You do understand I am much older than Dr. King was when he died. I have outlived him by a good number of years. He came from a time when they were hunting down revolutionaries. If you believe that Dr. King was of no effect, explain to me why they killed him. Explain to me why he was on their enemies list. Explain to me why J. Edgar Hoover called him the most dangerous nigga in America. Explain to me why it is that if he was so harmless and so innocuous, why is he dead? He's dead because he was not harmless. He is dead because after he died, they altered his image and fabricated a man who didn't exist. The one who did exist was a threat to the system. That doesn't mean that he was ideal. Idealism has its place. He wasn't ideal, but he was damn sure effective. And we owe much of what we have today and our ability to do it to his willingness to sacrifice himself for the years that he would not get to live, for the things that he would not get to do, for the legacy that he would not get to see. We owe it to him and all of the others who were willing to martyr themselves for our benefit. We owe that to all of them. Because in the words of Professor Black Truth, a people who do not honor their advocates will find themselves a people without advocates. A people who will not protect their advocates will find themselves a people without advocates. And we are most in need of advocates, and when we needed it most, we had that. For anybody who would try to criticize Dr. King, you should consider yourself lucky that you've even got the ability to speak his name. You should consider yourself lucky. We are going to go ahead and wrap things up here tonight. I hope you will take some time to contemplate that, to think it over, to consider what you've seen and what you've heard, and to take it upon yourself to be the next iteration of this most noble and honorable of lineages. You don't necessarily have to join the clergy. You don't necessarily have to organize a march. Adopt the spirit of resistance in your own life. Adopt the mantle of Black empowerment in your own life. And do not wait. I want to thank all of you for joining us on tonight's program. I would especially like to thank Nicole for joining us here tonight and contributing to tonight's program. Thank you very much to everyone on PayPal or Cash App. If you are new here to the Black Channel, welcome to the Haven of Intelligent Black Thought. We do this every weekend, over 132,000 subscribers and rising. We are not a little thing. Click that red subscribe button, click that yellow notification bell, go to our website, blackchannelfilms.com. That is blackchannelfilms.com. Check out our groundbreaking best-selling documentary works, 7 a.m., Gentrified, Race War, all available on DVD and Amazon. Go to blackchannelfilms.com, definitely at blackchannelfilms.com. And this concludes tonight's broadcast of the Black Channel. I am your host, your brother, your humble servant, the Black Authority. And until next time, my brothers and my sisters from around the world, something for you to remember, in the words of Dr. King, for anyone who might doubt what his principles were.
I come here tonight and plead with you. Believe in yourself and believe that you're somebody. As I said to the group last night, nobody else can do this for us. No document can do this for us. No Lincolnian Emancipation Proclamation can do this for us. No Kennysonian or Johnsonian Civil Rights Bill can do this for us. If the Negro is to be free, he must move down into the inner resources of his own soul and sign with a pen and ink of self-assertive manhood his own Emancipation Proclamation. let anybody take your manhood. Be proud of our heritage. As somebody said earlier tonight, we don't have anything to be ashamed of.